Hi, thanks for being here. I'm real excited about this talk. This has got a lot of information, um, and I think it presents a really good message about why Agile actually needs to come up to a new level, both in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, as well as where we come from with it. So, this is what I call the essence of Agile explained with lean flow and the theory of constraints. And in some ways, I actually admittedly maybe changing what Agile is. In fact, forget the may, I am. In the sense, I'll talk about the Agile Manifesto a bit. A little background for those who don't know me. So I've been around a long time. I've written several books. I'm in the Amplio development, being a professional coach, and the Amplio Scrum Guide are in process, but they're different degrees of done. The Amplio development is about 90%, being a professional coach about 95, and the Amplio Scrum Guide is a collection of both of those, so it's almost done too. I used to be very technical. You can see the book Design Patterns Explained, Essential Skills for the Agile Developer. I started programming in like 70, 71 when I was in college. I learned a lot about patterns, and in fact, my approach Amplio is based on a pattern language. It's not a framework, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to be talking about Amplio here. So I was with Net Objectives for 20 years. Well, it's my company. I created it. I was acquired by the PMI, and I left the PMI about a year and a half ago. I created the DA Value Stream Consultant Workshop for the PMI. I still teach it. I co-founded Lean Kanban University, but I'm no longer active. It's now known as Kanban University because I brought the Lean. David Anderson brought the Kanban. When I left, he changed it, dropped the Lean. And I'm very familiar with SAFe. I was the first SAFe program consultant trainer who was not an SAI employee because I knew Dean well, and he knew I knew how to do Agile at scale, and I was a contributor and all sorts of stuff. So I've been around quite a bit. I was also at the Snowbird 10, which was the kind of reunion of the original Agile Manifesto talk. Snowbird was the place. It was a ski resort. That's how it got its name. And if everybody would mute, that'd be great. We will have time for Q&A, but I'd actually like the Q&A to be done through the chat. And I will say a little bit about that. If it's a question of where to go, if it's a kind of a future question, then hold those to the end. I'm hoping to have 10 or 15 minutes of that at the end of this talk. If it's something you didn't understand or you violently disagree with, then put it in the chat. Say, can you repeat that? I got the chat up, so I'm looking at that as well. Okay, so here's the agenda. I'm going to start with a super fast overview of lean flow and TOC, and it doesn't do justice to any of them. It's literally one slide, just to throw out some things y'all have heard. I'm going to talk about the manifesto for Agile software development as an ideal, not as this is what we follow. I'll go then from insights on lean flow and the theory of constraints, kind of updating the Agile Manifesto, what needs to happen. And then I'll talk about how these methods create a context for Agile. And I'll also give an example of what I call Scrum as example. This is something I kind of created, I don't know, a long time ago, over a decade. It's a different way of viewing the practices of any approach, whether it's SAFe, whether it's Scrum. So it's nice to show how all this knowledge can be used to improve what we're doing. Okay. I'm really wanting to bring the manifesto for Agile software development up to date. I'm not trying to rewrite it. I want to be very clear about that. I have never claimed that would have been better had I been there, but I actually haven't always had some disagreements with it. I'm probably one of the few people who were around at the time that was kind of considered a little bit of thought leadership then, that never signed it. I've never signed it for a couple of reasons, and I'll actually mention that. I saw a couple of things wrong that I was like, no, I can't agree to this piece of it. Although the intent of it is wonderful, and it was great to have that mantra out there. Okay. So I want to point this out first. Lean and the theory of constraints may have started in manufacturing, but they're not limited to it. You keep hearing people talk about lean for manufacturing or theory of constraints for manufacturing. In the same way physics isn't about apples falling. There's a whole set of theories that apply to everything. And as a quick overview, lean, people talk about lean as eliminating waste, but actually the number one thing about lean is learning, is about how to improve how you're working, how to improve what you're trying to create. It's a learning process more than anything else. And this wasn't talked so much about directly in Taiichi Ohno's book, The Toyota Production System, but there are a lot of things that weren't talked about in that book. In fact, recently the revelation has come out that he didn't tell us everything because he didn't want America to come out and use it all against him. So he left some things out. I wasn't actually surprised when I read that because I knew he'd left stuff out. I didn't know that's why he left it out. Because lean is also about systems thinking and about the whole. And he didn't talk about that because in Japan, everybody knew that by that time. America still is catching up. But anyway, it's about eliminating waste and not just quality. We talk about build quality in with lean, but there's a lot of waste we create. And this is particularly true in software. The way we schedule things that causes ripple through effects, the way we start and stop work that causes rework that's needed. We'll see more of that. So just in time is actually this focus then to, by attending to things and not building them ahead of time, we avoid a lot of the waste creation. Like you can imagine how we've started projects, and you start a project, you set it down, you come back, you got to rework a lot of stuff. Or if there are delays, then you make an error, nobody detects it. So this is also where flow comes in. These actually overlap a tremendous amount. Manage queues, that, you know, the time work is waiting in between the steps. You know, TOC talks about attend to the constraint. It, of course, talks about value and value streams as all these. Use pull methods, meaning don't plan it out ahead, but wait until teams are ready to do the work, and then they pull it. So it's kind of self-managing workload. This is actually a key thing. It's not just about self-organization and self-management. It's about managing their own workload, how much they can work on. Because when you push work onto people, they don't do as effective. They don't work as effectively. Okay, they all talk about small items of value. You know, back in 2007, because I actually studied lean back in the 80s. I was very fortunate to have kind of start working with a kind of a business guru, and he was really into Toyota and Deming, and I learned a lot back in the 80s. I didn't really apply to software until after I read the Poppendix book, and I said, oh, duh, this is brilliant. But the point is, if you even just take these concepts and do what you do in Scrum and all this other stuff, is that you know, this background can help a lot. And Goldratt says often reducing batch size is all it takes to bring a system back into control. Yeah, and thanks for mentioning the voice quality, because sometimes I do have issues, but I'm glad it's working fine. What we want to look at is, remember, the Agile Manifesto starts with, we're discovering better ways. And to me, this is like 20 years, 21 years, 22 years. How are we still following a 22-year-old thing that starts with, we're doing better ways? And we want to look at this. And I don't mean to attack the Agile Manifesto. I really hope nobody gets that impression. It was brilliant. It was amazing. But a manifesto is a statement in time. And I can remember when, like, I was in this community with ex-peers and scrummers and some other people who weren't in that, like Alistair Coburn and Jim Highsmith. And we were wondering, what do we call this thing? So when the Agile Manifesto came out, it was like this breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, great, we got a name for this thing we're all trying to work on. But if you do a little analysis of it, you can see how it really was centric about software, developers, projects, team, customer. You know, it mentions business people, management, and sponsors a little bit, but not much. And this is kind of important to notice, that the world has changed. And if you look at kind of this way of looking at things where, you know, you've got projects, you know, I was told, well, I shouldn't call it project centric because, yeah, it does mention project several places. Doesn't even have the word product in it. And we're now talking project to product, but project to product is two different things. One is, are you treating it like, you know, the old PMI style project, like, you know, manage everything ahead, or just, are you thinking of it, it's like one and done, like a maintenance thing you're fixing, or is it a lifetime of the product? And what we want to notice is that we've gone maybe from this. The Agile Manifesto got us to there, but Lean and other things gets us here. So it is a project of product thinking. And that's now, of course, Mick Kirsten's book and stuff like that has definitely helped move us. So it's amazing Agile has taken us as far as it has. So I just want to be really clear that I'm just impressed and amazed. And like I said, I have no claim that it would have been better had I been there. I wasn't ready for something like this then. But it's not like it was 20 years ago. It's grown to be about the organization. It includes both new and old products that we're enhancing. We need to shift to thinking of Agile as a means to improve the success of the organization adopting it. It's not a team-centric thing anymore. And success is what we need to worry about. It's more than just, oh, it's not a product. It's not a product. It's what's the success of the organization. I get a lot of this from Tom Gill, by the way. I'm going to be trying to collect some things. He's both a good friend and a mentor for me. And his work focuses a lot on the success of organizations and what the value of stakeholders are. We need to include this. Also 20 years ago, it's mostly about early adopters who figured out what they didn't know. This is not so true today. Everybody's using it. The new product development game, which inspired Scrum, which has had a strong influence on Agile. They even talk about that if people don't know how to do things, they have the capability to figure out what's needed. And there's so much now in Agile. That's just a tough thing. Okay. So I like to think of it as an ideal, not like a way to work, not like this is what you follow. And but even when it was created, it's not just it's gotten outdated. There were some things missing right from the beginning. Systems thinking, I'm going to talk about that. Theory, it gives you some principles, but those were more as guidance than truly like these are the way the world works. Flow wasn't there. Scrum and XP, which strongly influenced it. We're really using just incremental methods. Scrum, XP had sprints, iterations, things of that nature. And that's what I mean. It was time box. I just now call that time boxing because even flow can be incremental. You might do an increment of value that you build. Okay. So the other aspect, this is kind of coming from this team up, is when an engine's obviously important in a car, but you don't design the car around the engine. Maybe you do if you've got a race car or something where the one thing you want is speed, and then you get the strongest engine you're allowed to. But normally you look at the whole, and we need to shift then from team agility to business agility. And I suggest we're still having the tail wag the dog. That the team, even today, it's still team centric. It's like we see how to combine the teams. People talk about scaling Agile. Well, let's start with the team and then scale it up, which I don't ascribe to, by the way. So we need an holistic view. I don't believe in the top down either. I believe you got to look at value streams, but that's another talk. In fact, I have that talk. So starting at the team is no longer the best approach. In fact, I'm not sure it really ever was, except we didn't know anything else. I've even wrote a post on this, how sometimes starting with teams, even cross-functional teams, doing Scrum well can be harmful to organizations. I've saw this over and over again. Well, it took me a while to notice it, but then when I saw it, I said, oh yeah, this happens a lot, where a company would say, hey, let's try Agile, let's get a Scrum team. They get a Scrum team. But what they did is they pulled people from different parts of the organization. And in the process, they weakened the rest of the organization because they took some key people. And yeah, of course, it worked great. But the problem was they didn't deal with inter-team dynamics, which are quite different from intra-team dynamics. You have to be very careful of taking something that works at a team level and then applying it to the enterprise because it may not work. And even SAFe, which is an enterprise approach, has you start with essential SAFe, which is a team level. Actually, I think that's one of the serious problems with it. The higher levels are so complicated, you can't start with them necessarily. But starting at the team level, starting at the team level often leads to stagnation because you haven't solved the problem of how you decompose things. You're just doing a better planning method. I'm not saying Agile method necessarily, but you're doing a better planning method when you've got hundreds of people involved. And that's one reason it kind of can stagnate. They don't take it further. So effective teams are also only a part of the organization, and sometimes it's better to start elsewhere. And I've done this. One of my SAFe transformations, I used to, like I said, I used to do SAFe, was the gold partner. I saw that it was better to create the context for everything, start with that. And even if my teams weren't that great, they understood the context they fit in. Maybe surprisingly, but if you create the context that the teams have to coordinate with each other, you stop having to answer the question, why are we doing 2 week sprints? Well, we need that for coordination. We need it for feedback. Maybe it's not the best way for us personally to work. Maybe we'd like all the information, but to coordinate with other teams that are dependent on us and that we're dependent on, you have to work that way. So sometimes creating the whole and then filling it in is actually faster and better. That's why I always say what we do is agile at scale, not scaling agile. Okay. So these 3 have a lot in common. I use all 3. They're, to me, I'm not saying they're the same because they have a different emphasis, but they have a huge amount of common. There's a lot of practices that overlap. Like in that summary I showed you, a lot of them do that. You know, like they all use pull. They all are about eliminating waste. It's just what they emphasize. So they're very consistent in their mindset. And this is where I want to take a couple of minutes to reflect. Are we going to go with practices? Or are we going to go with a mindset? The mindset's where you come from. Let me actually use use waterfall and agile. In waterfall, we say we can predict, we plan out ahead, we schedule ahead, we make a design. See, the mindset is that we think we can do this. Of course we can't, but we think we can. We think we know enough that we can figure out what we need to build by doing analysis. Whereas agile tells us, no, you can't. You can analyze all you want to, but you're going to have surprises. You're going to discover. So the mindset shift is, let's build in small pieces and let's discover and let's adjust. Let's pivot. Let's expect this to happen. In fact, let's even encourage this to happen. So that's what I mean by a mindset. And I'm going to suggest there's more value in understanding the mindsets of these 3 than just putting the practices. In other words, like if you put an agile practices in a waterfall mindset, it doesn't make waterfall agile. If you put lean flow theory constraints into an agile mindset, it doesn't make it lean flow and theory constraints. There are differences. They're consistent, but lean goes a bit further. And we need to shift the mindset as much as add the practices. That's my main contention here. Okay. Well, what do they have in common? I'm going to suggest more than the ones I list, but the most important one is systems thinking, you know, and the value and value streams and continuous learning. And, you know, we're going to go through each one of these. That's my intention here. So systems thinking, and I'm going to use Russ Acuff. He's my favorite person on systems thinking. And in the resources, there's actually a 12-minute video audio, like what if Russ Acuff did a TED Talk? You can even just Google or Bing that. But I like these quotes because it sets the background. Successful problem solving requires finding the right solution to the right problem. We fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. This is kind of like we continuously try to do better at the wrong thing instead of analyzing why are we doing this in the first place. I'm going to talk about this kind of learning. That's called single loop learning. How do you get better at what you're doing instead of double loop learning? How do you see if maybe my assumptions are wrong and I should be doing something else? So our ability to solve a problem is limited by our conception of what is feasible. That's true too. We can't do things we don't think are possible or that we don't even see. And you rarely improve an organization as a whole by improving the performance of one or more of its parts. Again, a team-centric view is not going to deal with the organization problems. Now, if you start to think about this and you look at this, you start to wonder, maybe this is why we're having all these problems at scale. Why do executives and managers not get excited? Because Agile so often comes from the team level. Anyway, systems thinking, that's what I said to talk about. So let's do that. So Acuff really makes a good case that systems are defined by the relationships between the components, not the components themselves. And this is important. And this is how systems thinking deals with complexity, by the way. I'm not going to go into that much, but if you're interested, I've got a lot of writing on this. Take a different approach. This is also based on theory constraints to some extent. that we're viewing knowledge work as always being complex, but the different kinds of relationships are what adds the complexity, and we can look at those. Now, if you take the best parts of the best cars, put them together, you don't have a car. You have a pile of junk. Carness exists in the system as a whole, not in its parts. We need to recognize that. This is systems thinking. It's all the pieces together. Okay. So what this tells us is trying to do Agile at scale by taking individuals and lashing together doesn't work well. We must look at the whole and design how we want it to fit together. Okay. And this is usually an emergent process. I say maybe, but it often is. Okay, so we got systems thinking, value and value streams. I'm going to quickly go over this. These have been misrepresented at times. SAFE's getting a lot closer to what value streams are now than it used to be when it was first introduced. And they're really not streams. They're really networks. The work in knowledge work, the work branches out, comes back, interacts. So, but I still use the term. I think Mick Kirsten in Project to Product calls them value networks. That's a much more accurate description. In manufacturing, it's more like a stream because it's, there's a linearity there that's not present in knowledge work, but I just still use the term. They go from work when you start working until it's created and used. There are many ways to classify them. And I want to be clear, I have my way. I'm not saying it's the best way. I find it's the easiest way to teach from. So there are other people, somebody classifies them as up to 14 types. I have 4 types. The one that's most commonly thought of are the development value streams. These are the value streams that create the systems. This is what we think about when we talk about agile development. These teams are working. These teams are what's going on. It's how we build stuff, okay? And then we also have the customer value streams. This is where they get their work done. And then we have the operations value streams. This is like, how you support the computers that people are using. You've got business enabling value streams, and these are called operational value streams. These are on the right. I'll just put these here for a minute, put it back to where I had it. These are the value streams. And I like these 4 because I can explain things to executives better. Here's the work we're doing. This is for our customers. We have to remember our own people need to support. And then we have HR, sales, things like that. But value streams, the business stakeholders, in a sense, have their own value stream when they create strategies. In other words, they'll take time to figure out what are we working on, the PMO will figure out what the products are. This is actually not part of these value streams. These here create the context for these, and then we'll take something and say that starts the development value stream, and these work within the context of this. So I just kind of wanted to make that kind of clear. But we talk about managing value streams, and I want to make clear that they provide more than this. Value streams can align people within the value stream. How do we work together to get the value? We can also align things across value streams when we have people who are needing to be in more than one value stream. Your operations, your shared services, things of that nature are often in multiple value streams. So seeing these multiple value streams is helpful. Value streams compete with each other for capacity and physical resources. So they're useful there as well. Now, there's also continuous learning. All of 3 of these are about continuously learning. And this is a very important quote by Deming here, which is that experience teaches nothing. In fact, there's no experience to record without theory. Without theory, there's no learning, and that is their downfall. People copy examples, and then they wonder, what is the trouble? They look at examples, and without theory, they learn nothing. Now, by theory, I mean like first principles, things that really guide us, that are kind of the truth about how the world works. I don't mean theory that someone makes up on their own, and I'll talk more about that as we go. And this is mostly missing in the Agile space. This is the explaining the why things work. And if you don't really understand the why things work, then it's a problem. And then you get into the kind of the dogma, well, this is what something says. So So what we want to attend to is we're discovering better ways. And one of the ways we've discovered is why this stuff works. And it just hasn't been incorporated into it. It shouldn't be about getting better at old habits, but about creating new, more effective ones. And this takes a different kind of learning than what we normally do. So this is an example of it. We call it single and double loop learning. This comes from Chris Argyris. And basically single loop learning, like if I go down here, we do something, we get a result, we see how to do it better. This is called single loop learning. This is what most people do. I tried planning, it didn't work so well. So how do I do planning better? This is doing better. Double loop learning is challenging your assumptions to maybe do different. And double loop learning challenges the what. And this is an important this is an important concept. And I like from How Buildings Learn, it's kind of an interesting book, talks about how single loop learning is about encouraging us to follow our habits and enforces our habits. Double loop learning has us question our assumptions to make new habits. It actually goes even deeper in what's called triple loop learning, which is how do you challenge your assumptions better? So see here, it's like single loop learning is how do we do better at what we're doing? Double loop learning is how do we do better at figuring out what we should be learning? And triple loop learning has us figure out how can we challenge our assumptions better? And all of these are necessary. And this is really, to me, a lot of what lean, flow, and the theory of constraints is. And I don't see much of this in the Agile space. I don't see that much double loop learning because frameworks actually discourage us from doing double loop learning. You can do some challenge of some assumptions, but like in Scrum, it's immutable. I mean, okay, you can change it and then you're not doing Scrum, but there's a psychological impact of I've got my Scrum Master, or we've been told to do Scrum. There's a certain amount of, well, I can't leave this, whether it's conscious or not, or enforced or not. So we don't tend to challenge things in Scrum or in framework. SAFe also, you rarely see people challenging it. There's no part in the framework that tells us to challenge itself. This is, again, why Amplio is not a framework, why things like TameFlow, another great approach, is not a framework. You want to challenge all this stuff. That's the idea. Okay. When you understand what's going on, and we'll see this a little bit, you can also removing impediments is great, but avoiding them before they happen is great. So inspect and adapt's fine, but it's always something bad happened, then you fixed it instead of actually getting a theory as to what to do. So I'm going to suggest that's partly what we want to learn. And part of this is to recognize, this is maybe my favorite quote, we do not think and talk about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about by Edgar Schein. And when you limit what you're looking at, well, you don't challenge the assumptions, when you don't provide a lot of the kind of practices or ideas that are needed, you often just never see them. You never discover them. So we not only need a new way of training and continuous learning, I think we need both of these. Don't limit what's learned. And the idea of simplicity, we've got this idea, we got to start simple. You know what? You do have to start simple. But that does not mean how you start is what you end with. In other words, don't have the way you start be all that you need. You need to have a core and then a way of disseminating it. This would be actually just the whole attitude of lean, flow, and the theory of constraints. I can start with what I know and I can expand on it later. From a training point of view, I think we need incremental flipped classroom workplace learning. What this means is I'm going to learn a little bit. It's done with videos and then Q&A so people can try it in the workplace. This is the way lean and flow and theory of constraints talk about. I go into my work and I adjust it by working in it. This is a very key piece. Simply built is often difficult to understand. Properly designed approaches takes a lot of work. I've been working on my approach for now 17 years, and I'm kind of still working on it, but at least I feel, well, it took me 17 years. I wouldn't say I've had it for years. It's been improving for years, but it's now simpler to use. Okay. So what I want to do is take a step back. I want to look at what are we trying to do? Okay. What does success mean? I'm going to suggest what we're really trying to do is have our organizations be successful, have our people be successful. What does this mean to be successful? So for a profit going organization, that would probably be value to stakeholders, both internal and external, in a cost-effective manner. You could also, and I've done this too, think about, well, what does it mean for the individuals? What does success mean? Well, satisfying work, responsibility, having a good place to go to. So we really want our methods to be about success, not just about chomping out value on a regular basis. Okay, so let's look at the manifesto again. This is just what I showed. What shifts are needed? How do we shift from this? And one is, we've talked about this already, from the team to the value stream, from software to any type of product. We're not just building software products now. Although admittedly, as the world gets to be more digital, it seems this is more the thing to be doing. But projects to products, that should say products, sorry. Projects to products and, projects and long-lasting products. Sorry, that is right. In other words, we still do have projects. You know, if you have a contract to say, maintain the George Washington Bridge for the next 2 years, that's a project. But most of our stuff is actually shifting to long-lasting products. So for building products, we need to have this mindset shift. Okay, customers have to include all stakeholders. Customers are stakeholders, but internal ones. We got to go from increments to increments or flow. Got to include that. And from stories to value. Personally, I don't like the user story moniker. It always has this focus on the user. What about the stakeholders? What's the value here? It's implied. But again, we don't think and talk about what we see. We see what we were able to think and talk about. So when we talk about user stories, we're talking about users. We're talking about stories. We're not talking about increments of value to stakeholders. That's important. Okay. So the essence of Agile is learning as we move forward, not just about how to improve, but how do we achieve the target, but what the target is. This is obviously part of in the Agile Manifesto. You know, we talk about we're not going from contracts, we're going to collaboration. We got to figure out what's needed. And we have to look at what value will create success for the organization. And this requires quick feedback. I like to say you can only go as fast as the actionable feedback you have or that you get that you work on. If you work at a slow pace of feedback, you're going to be able to learn slowly. I remember this is just an anecdote, but it taught me an interesting lesson, a long time ago, like around 2003, 4, or 5, maybe. I was in I used to follow some of my consultants at Net Objectives because our top consultants were better than I was, and probably still am for that matter. But I remember one episode with Alan Shedawada, our president at the time, and he had a big influence on me. And I was following him. It was really more his engagement. But so we were talking to like the, I don't know, IT director or something like that. And we were talking about Scrum. And the guy asked, how many sprints does it take until a team, gets it done? It's effective. And Alan immediately answered, no, he didn't ask how many sprints. He asked, sorry. He asked, how long does it take? That's what he said. He said, how long does it take? But Alan immediately responded, 3 sprints. And 2 things hit me. First of all, the guy asked time, and Alan mentioned sprints. And the second thing that hit me is I agreed with him. See, it's not the time, it's the number of feedback cycles that you get in learning. This is not just true for Scrum. I just remember that story. So if you can speed up the time frame of your learning, you will learn a lot faster. People talk about experience and how it takes years of experience. And I'm saying, no, it just takes dozens and dozens of feedback cycles. And if it takes you a week to get a feedback cycle, it's going to take you years to learn. But if you can get the feedback cycles faster, you can learn faster. So we need quick feedback. We need fast delivery of value. One other thing, on this first point, there's a cost to feedback being slow. One is obviously you've made an error and you don't detect it quickly in this way. But the other one is the longer you wait for feedback, the more expensive it is to adjust. This is important. I mean, a good metaphor is the Concorde, the supersonic jet. where that thing, I think, course corrects something like 60 times. I don't know if it's a second or a minute. It's like always course correcting. And the reason is because micro course corrections don't waste any energy. But if you get off course, you have the problem not only of you just were traveling not at the perfect place, but it takes more to correct because you've been in the wrong direction. So we want to recognize quick feedback is essential. We want fast delivery of value, but now for an organization, not just the team. And it must be actionable feedback. What can we do with it? You know, how to work better, how to improve our understanding, change our target as needed. Okay, so I'm going to give a couple examples of this. So we've got the essence of Agile now based on lean and flow and theory constraints as this quick feedback. We've got things like we want to go fast. No, excuse me. We want fast feedback. We don't necessarily go faster. In other talks, when I've talked about value streams, the importance of value stream mapping is to identify where there are delays of the work in the workflow. In other words, we're not trying to do each step faster. What we're trying to do is avoid the time that the work is waiting in queues. I should have been clear about that. That's one of the bigger things, is we want to have smaller queues and not have work waiting in them. So let's look at an example of this. This is how flow can speed up feedback and stop errors. This is actually an interesting insight, you know, how error detection can turn into prevention. If you're using a flow system, and I've got this as a week, et cetera, but let's say something happens in the beginning of the first week and you detect it. Oh man, we made that error, bummer. I put a fix in that causes it. See, the other piece about systems thinking is that systems cause most of our errors, is something Deming attributed, like 94, 95, 6% of our errors are what are called systemic errors. They're errors due to the system. So if we get an error, we're going to get another one until we fix it. So if I've got this flow where something happens, I get feedback and I act on it, I can actually detect the error and then stop it from happening by immediately doing this. Now, if I've got a sprint that's 2 weeks, then that error won't get detected until the retro. Now, I might discover it in the daily scrum, but I might not. So if the faster we can get actionable feedback, we solve a lot of problems sooner. This is one reason sometimes suggest actually doing sprints, doing retros mid-sprint, in the middle, when you could actually get some value out of fixing it. I think one of the problems people have with retros at the end of a sprint is, think about it. If you were successful, it's like, man, we nailed it. We don't need to do a retro. And if you weren't successful, it's like, I don't want to get my face rubbed in that we just blew it. So it's emotionally difficult. But in the middle, it's like, hey, what can we do now to improve the rest of the sprint? And that, you know, even doing both of them, but just making them shorter is another way. So this is an idea here of going smaller. Going smaller reduces waste, which helps us go faster. That's the key thing. There are other ways we can think about it. If we're talking about managing our queues, talking about work in process, lowering it, okay? And consider, now, we use a term in Amplio we call minimum business increments. I don't need to go into it, but just think of the difference between an MVP and an MBI. A minimum viable product, a la Eric Ries, again, not what SAFe does. They've, I think, misnamed that or misbastardized it or whatever. It's really kind of absurd, but forget that. An MVP, a la Eric Ries, says I'm doing thin slices to discover if I had a product. An MBI is I have a product and I'm investing in an improvement of the product. These are two different things. One's an investment of discovery. The other's an investment of learning. I have a lot of that in my books, in our workshops. So if I've got, like, I'm working on this, it's partially done. This is almost done, but not quite. These are features, say. This I haven't done. And I have a choice. Do I take this story or that story? See, this is where this theory and insight. See, if I take this story, what I can do is basically finish this feature. Doesn't finish this, but I will get feedback now on the feature. If I do this, I'm starting something new. I've opened up my work in process. I don't get feedback on either feature. I'm just getting feedback on the stories. We call this accumulated risk. I want to keep the number of things open down. So Lean suggests that what we would do is do this one. questions about this I would like answer if this isn't clear. See, this is how we can get some guidance. Now, if I don't have the people to do this one, that's fine. But now I'm using theory that says keep the number of things in play lower is a good way to go. This is almost always the case. It's at least gives us some guidance. And yet what you often see in like new Scrum teams is they'll open up whole bunches of things. They'll open up stories across multiple features. And then you see this kind of hockey stick. Almost everything's open until the end. It all gets closed, or maybe not all. But part of it is because there's all this waste. There's extra work that's being created. Lean and flow and theory constraints are about not creating this extra work. Okay. Theory constraints is more than attending to the constraint. It avoids doing too much work before the constraint because that'll just add large queues that creates waste. You can move capacity to the constraint. I've gone into some companies where it was obvious what the constraint were. They knew what the constraint was, but they weren't thinking how this one constraint, this one person was causing a lot of damage. So they just kept going as they were. And I would just say, hey, what about this? This is, again, they weren't talking about it. They didn't see it. I mention it. Now they see it. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Hell, let's do that. A lot of the good ideas that are out there, people are not finding them because they're not talking about them. Okay, constraints also provide context on how work should be done and points to what shared services should be helping with. If I'm a shared service, I'm like database person, setting up some operations, I should attend to where I'm slowing the more important work down. So it gives guidance when you understand this. These decisions can be readily inferred from the theory. So it's not all practice here. You can make a lot of inference on things. Okay, so let's talk about what a lot of people consider the bane of Agile, executives and management. Okay. Now, I find it interesting that Scrum, which has had a huge influence on Agile, was inspired by the new product development game by Takeuchi and Nonaka. Okay, that was in '86. They also wrote another book that has been completely ignored, particularly by Scrum, but people in general. SAFe talks about it a little bit. They also wrote an article towards middle up-down management, same people, 2 years later. And they call it towards middle up-down management because they're talking about middle management looking up the value stream to see what's needed. And then they look down the value stream to create the environment to manifest that. You know, middle up-down management's about creating an effective environment and the knowledge to work in order to have effective value streams. Now, Don Reinertsen, in a seminal book, let's see what he calls it, product development. I can't think of the name. Second generation flow, product development flow, second generation lean product development by Don Reinertsen. And he talks about the 777. And in there, he talks about how they didn't just make it how people could organize, but how you had to give managers had to give people the information and the rules for making decisions. And you might have different levels be able to do different size decisions. But it wasn't just a structure. It was how do people make good decisions? It made it so you didn't have to micromanage things. And that's what middle up-down management is. What do I need to do so I don't have to micromanage things? You could actually just say, well, that's what management should be doing. They manage the environment. But one of the reasons Agilists have so much problems with management, in my opinion, is they don't treat them friendly. For years, they were called chickens, the chicken and pig story. Oh, well, you're involved, but you're not committed. There's been a lot of disrespect. And I would suggest that if you treat managers and if you expect managers to resist, they will, because you're not talking to them. Kind of paraphrasing Henry Ford there. So we want to actually get on their side and speak to them, use insights to talk to them. You know, and what they want is they want lower risk. Now, they may not say this, but I've talked to some risk experts, people whose livelihood is talking to executives. And they've told me, look, number one thing, they want a lower risk. They don't want to get in jail. They don't want to violate rules. They don't want to get fired. They don't want something massive happening. So a lot of what looks like resistance is because what they're afraid of is you're going to add risk to them. So you got to recognize that they want lower costs. Now, they really should be looking for higher value, and they do get that. So this may not be the right order. I'm not saying what the right order is. I'm saying this is the way they think about it. You need to talk to them about this. Feedback gets us lower risk. Eliminating waste gets us lower costs. And a focus on success gets us higher value. So this is really good. And it can assist people seeing this. And I've got articles, by the way, on why to talk to executives from a value stream point of view. Okay, so let's just summarize this. Focus on time, not how hard people work. We want to remove delays, not going faster. We want to continuously learn. We need to avoid overloading people because that causes delays. Most of us spend time working on work we've created that has no value than on work we really need to do. You look and see how much time devs spend fixing bugs. You look and see how much time we build the wrong thing. You look at how much time is spent in multitasking. More time is spent on wasted effort. So what we have to attend to is these principles get us there. Okay, now, this is here more for reference, but I threw it in, and I'm going to quickly go over it in a couple of minutes because it is worth going over. And I guess what I'm going to do is maybe take the full hour of talking. I did say I think this was an hour and a half. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to make sure I get all the information in the hour. And then I'm going to hang around as long as people want to have questions. So I've got 12 more minutes to cover the last 8 slides. I can do that even with something this big. This, again, is here for reference. And by the way, if you're in the Amplio community of practice, you'll get access to this within a couple of days. It'll take us a little while to produce it. But if you're not, it'll be available in about a month. We're trying to encourage people to get into the Amplio community practice, which is free, by the way. Anyway, so I've already covered this. You know, this is just a summary. I don't really need to go over this, but I mentioned first principles, and I didn't quite explain them fully. First principles really describe how the world works, and those listed relate to knowledge work. I'm not trying to come up with a system that handles everything. I'm knowledge work, product development, maintenance, service development, things like that. They stand on their own. They're not defined, but are discovered. So I'm not saying these are first principles, like these are my first principles. If you disagree with them, then we should have a conversation. I think this reflects reality, and I've discerned these by looking at flow, lean theory, constraints. You know, we can complete smaller items faster than large items. Local improvements don't necessarily result in global improvements. I'll just give you a minute to read these. Okay, and then guidance. And then just stop here. I'm going to give you about a minute. If you got questions, just put them in the chat. Because I do want to talk about, and I will talk about the factors for effective value streams, because this is actually a critical aspect of my approach anyway, but it's based on theory of constraints and lean and flow. Okay, you can come back to those. Okay, so what do I mean by factors for effective value streams? You all have had this experience, I'm sure. You go into a new company, or you're interviewing for a company, you walk in, you get a little bit of information on how they're working, and you say, oh my God, how do these guys get anything done? Or you go into a company and you say, wow, this will be so much fun working here. These guys really have it together. And you may not know what you're looking at, but you have an intuitive sense of it. And this is what I mean. There are factors. There are things you could look at. Like, what are we looking at? Is the size and what's being created? Is it really huge things like in waterfall, or small things? Is work visible? Are these people overloaded with work and multitasking? Are they getting actionable feedback? Do they understand the way they're working? You know, are they maintaining qualities that enhance flow? Are they jammed? Do they have poor product quality? Are they organized for efficiency? In other words, are the teams in the right structure? Cross-functional is good when you can get it. What if you can't? Are they managing the system? Do they have cost-effective continuous improvement, and are people motivated? Now, I'm not going to go through these. These are just examples of this, but I'm going to suggest this has been something I'd been hunting for years, since about 2005, and I felt I was nailing it. Yeah, just a second, Jim. I'll get to that. That I was finding it, and I came across this book called The Choice by Ellie Goldratt, not The Goal, which is also brilliant, but in The Choice, Goldratt talks about factors, he calls them inherent simplicity. He says it's inherent simplicity, that there are relatively few things that control even a complex system, and that they work in harmony. And when he said that, I realized, oh, all these things I've been looking for, it's kind of like, see how all these things are working together. And I want to get a sense of these because we're going to use them as a couple examples in the last few slides. Yeah, handoffs. The thing is, we'd like to lower them, not that we can get rid of them. Yeah, okay, that's a good question. I'll handle that actually after I go through the talk. These are really good questions. Definitely the world's getting faster, which is why we need feedback quicker. Okay, those are great questions. Keep adding them. I'll get to them at the top of the hour. Okay, so what I want to do is say, well, okay, Al, this is awesome, a little complicated, maybe a little abstract, but let's make it a little realer. And I want to look at how you can use some of these without making a massive shift, okay? So back in 2007, I said it's useful to think of Scrum as a partial implementation of Lean. And I was told actually that wasn't true by Ken and Jeff, but now they've switched. But I felt this was true. And what I did is I looked at, well, a cross-functional team is kind of like Lean's work cell, which they have one person running multiple machines. In manufacturing, it's like the machines are the whole thing. You get something done. The idea is you have this group that work together to get something done. You know, iterations are a great way to limit size of work, and it speeds up feedback because you got to get something done in the time box. Retros, well, again, feedback for improving work. So I would put all this stuff, you know, we're using pull methods. I was thinking of Scrum as this way of doing what Lean was suggesting us from principles, but there's power when you do it this way. That when you do it this way, you can think of, well, maybe Scrum's an example. What if you think of Scrum not as the process, but as an example of how to do things? Okay, so now if we have the objective of a Scrum practice and we understand the theory behind it, we can look at it a different way. Every practice is intended to implement an objective. Great. Well, let's look at what it is. Maybe we could find a better way to meet the objective. Now, this isn't Scrum But, because Scrum But has been defined to be when you don't remove the impediment. This is Scrum, I call it Scrum Substitute. Well, we're doing this instead of Scrum because it's a better result, and it's not Scrum anymore, true, but it's a better result. So what I put together, this is in my book and in my workshops too, is I could say, well, let's see, I'm doing this, like I'm doing sprints, and maybe I want to do flow, maybe I want to do flow within sprints. So I can, number one, I usually is what I'm doing, and number 2 and 3 are like different options. And I could literally go down through here and take the 10 factors for effective value streams and which one does better. You know, rank them. Which one's like, oh, well, in this case, accelerates value delivery. Okay, option 1 does better than these 2, or maybe, well, 1 and 2 are both visible, but 3 isn't. And I can look to see which ones do well, and I come up with totals. Now, I'm not saying just take the numbers rowly. It's not the intention of templates like this. That doesn't work, and it's kind of risky. I'm saying these give you the things to look at. Remember, we don't think and talk about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about, or read, I could say. So I create templates like this. I think that's an important thing. See, what's possible now is we can use, say, time boxing or flow, depending on what works, because we have theories about it. So we can challenge that we always have to use sprints. And I'm just picking on Scrum. Sprints are pretty widespread. You know, Kanban uses flow. But if you're not in a Kanban approach, you're not thinking about it sometimes. So I'm saying, well, maybe we ought to do that. Let's look at different situations. There are reasons to do time boxing. There are reasons to choose flow. And we can now realize that we don't have to be stuck with practices, but rather we could look at alternate practices and then use the lean flow theory constraints to decide which one works better. And there's zillions of alternatives. Discipline Agile has its browser with hundreds. Scrum has hundreds with Scrum Plot, the Scrum patterns. So you've got all this great stuff, and now you have a way to choose between it. Okay, almost done. So just as a quick summary, these are things I've talked about. Inherent problems at scale, what are value streams, first principles, MVPs and MBIs. Actually, I've mentioned some of these. This is actually, I think, maybe not the best summary, but how to improve Scrum. Okay, so we want to come from success, attend to value streams, understand the fundamental principles, innovate by looking at the customer journey. I hadn't talked about this. I've meant to, when I talked about the development value stream and the customer value stream. We want to look to see how customers work. We want to focus on the way the customer value stream works, and we build to improve that. We tend not to do that so much. I think one of the reasons we need UX is devs don't tend to look at how the customers are working, but they force them to use their systems. We want to reorganize essential actions, recognize essential actions taken, and ensure we're in a pull system. And we use theory to guide practices. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick summary and show references, and then I'm going to go to those questions in the order they were done. So if you have other questions, please put them there. See, I like this. It's just a metaphor. But being simple and using only empiricism, yes, you could figure it out. I joke sometimes, half the bike, twice the effort. You know, just the fact that it's simple isn't good. If we make it a little more sophisticated, we add theory, we have something much nicer than we had before. And that's, to me, what flow, lean theory of constraints is. Actually, amplio means in Latin means improve, and that's my approach. I add some other stuff that were inspired by flow, lean, and theory constraints, are consistent with it, but aren't there. So here's some resources that I mentioned: books, the Amplio development book, the Path to Effective Lean Agile Teams. These are all on the website, successengineering.works books. Being a Professional Coach is a unique book. Paula Stewart's helping me write this. It's really a lot of how do you apply this theory. It's not just how do you listen and how do you be and all that, although we have a little bit on that. It's more how do you take theory and explain it to people? How do people learn, and how do you pay attention to that? I've taken a subset of these two and made what I call the Amplio Scrum Guide. It's how do you, if you're doing Scrum, you want to keep doing it, you don't want to abandon it, how you can take this stuff to that. And the last page I've got here is just some more resources that are available. Let me go through. So I'm done right now. Okay. I'm going to go through questions. So the way to get your questions answered is to put it in the chat, because that's what I'm going to go through right now. And I'm going to keep going. People can leave if they like. I won't be offended, but I'm going to keep going at least for another half hour until people run out of questions. So I'm happy. I love getting questions. So anyway, companies are busy getting projects done, not looking at how to be better, absent an explicit focus on being better. Okay. Yeah, this is true. Now, the question is, why is it true? And that's what you're asking. Well, you're asking for thoughts. So my view is, if people are stuck in something, they can't get out of it unless they know they're stuck in something. But we don't talk about this, or how do we get better as abstract. One of the cool things about Lean that I didn't mention is they talk about visual controls as opposed to information radiators. And what a visual control is, it not only tells you the status of the work, it tells you how the work is being done. And what I suggest people do is you track. I don't mean in detail, don't add a lot of overhead, but where's the waste? You need to make management aware of the problems that are present. And once you start seeing that the problems that are present are causing a lot of issues, are causing waste, are causing you to slow down, add risk, add costs. Remember, it's what I want: lower risk, lower costs, raise value. That you need to make it apparent what's the cost of not getting better. And this is really how Toyota got there. See, a lot of people talk about Toyota's eliminating waste and just in time, and that's true. But as I've studied Toyota more, and I'm upwards now, I guess I'm toward the end of the fourth decade. I started studying Toyota in the late 80s, mid 80s. What I've really come to the conclusion is Lean is really about learning. I guess this really flipped for me when I read Michael Ballet's Lean Strategies. It's about learning. How do you discover? Think of the Lean Startup. That's all about learning. So you've got to flip into learning as a way of lowering risk, lowering costs, increasing value. And the way to do that is to start at least letting management know what this not learning is costing us. And that's a great question. I might write up more on that, but that's a quick start. Okay. And the handoffs, first principle. Okay, so you got to recognize handoffs are going to happen. I mean, of course they do, but you can try to lower them if you have people working together, pairing, mobbing. Those are great things, because when you hand off, inherently in a handoff is a loss of information. Okay, so you remove them as best you can, but you improve them as well. one of the ways that I think Success Engineering, my company, is pioneering some of this is we use virtual collaboration boards to manage a lot of the stuff. In other words, we have a board that we can all come together, and it kind of a whiteboard, virtual collaboration. We actually use that to show where we are and to manage things. So we can come in and work at different times, and yet everybody can see everything at the same time. So there's a tracking of it in the sense that we have places to write down where we made decisions or why. And it's not a heavy documentation. I don't mean that. It's just actually just a writing down, journaling in a sense. Journaling in meetings as you go, but in a way that keeps a structure and a history. And it's still around. In fact, this is how I do my coaching engagements now. One of the things I noticed, I did a lot of consulting and coaching at Net Objectives, and there was a problem I knew I had. I did not know how to solve it because I didn't know these boards well until I got into the PMI, and Joshua Barnes, my partner now in Success Mentors, where we do our training, very familiar with boards. What I would do is I would study a company for a day or two with them, and then I'd write up in Word and PowerPoint, whatever, what a suggested thing we all agreed to, and present it to them. And I was pretty good, and they really liked it. The problem is those documents died instantly. Oh, Al gave this great presentation, it's over. With a Miro board, you could actually do the same kind of stuff as you're going and document it, and you leave them with the board. And now it's a live document. This is an agreement on how we're working if you structure it properly. So that's how you can minimize them. I would suggest looking at the cost of your handoffs. And in some cases, the costs are so high, it is worth mobbing. I love the mobbing idea. Okay. Startups being used, being a startup as an excuse to focus on speed and excessive whip over quality and real problem discovery. Okay, if you're doing a startup and you've got excessive whip, that's something wrong. The whole lean startup, the startup way is about focus on what's the essential piece you have to know to learn something. Either learn how to manage the product, learn to challenge your assumptions, learn what the product is. So something's wrong in this thinking. Let me think. If I can't actually recall seeing with this. Now, if what you mean, and let me know, Jim, if this is really what you meant. I mean, you meant this, but if this is the other thing you meant. Sometimes startups are an excuse to not be disciplined. Let's just do shit and excuse my language. Let's just do stuff. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. I figured that because that's the only rationale I can think of. Okay. So here's the thing about this. There is a pervasive idea, and I think it was misinterpreted by the Agile Manifesto. I mean, they knew what they meant, but that's not what's gotten. If you don't know XP XP, one of the cool things about XP is it goes really fast, extreme programming. It's really good, but it takes discipline to do it. What you need in a startup is you need the discipline of doing the right things. And the myth that's out there is that this takes you more time. The fact is it's faster to do it this way. It's faster to pay attention to the right things. But we have a fear because it's unknown. And part of that fear is because we don't have any rationale for this stuff. Let me tell a story about this. I did a design patterns class once at one company, and the guy who was kind of a higher director or something there moved to another bigger company. And he had, I don't know, about 100 people under him. And he asked me to do a 2-day workshop. It was kind of a special case workshop because he had a bigger budget, and I don't normally train 100 people or so at a time. So he couldn't get into the full design patterns, but the idea was to get this mental shift on how to design. So I had 2 days, and I can still remember. It's funny, some images are just imprinted in your head, and this is one of them. I still remember that room. And I remember it was kind of a small auditorium. I had about 100 people in a 200-person capacity room. And I had this agreement starting out. I said, look, here's what I want to do. Day one, we're going to figure out the mindset of patterns and how to use them. And then day two, we'll apply them. So this was great, and everybody was kind of excited about this day one. And day one was great. We learned a lot of stuff. Everybody was happy. I was like, okay, great. Now we're going to apply it day two. So I show up day two, and I'm pretty good about reading a room. I mean, you get good after you do it a long time. And I've actually studied a lot of psychology. I actually have a degree in psychology, mathematics, and computer science. So I've always been interested in that. And I walk into the room at the start of the day, and fear is palpable. I mean, I could just sense it, Oh my God, was all that was present in the room. And I asked them, I said, you guys were so happy yesterday. You don't seem happy. You don't seem happy today. And somebody said, well, yesterday we were just learning. Now you're telling us we actually have to use these new methods. And we have a deadline in 2 weeks. And there's no way we're going to use these new methods and get this deadline in 2 weeks. And I said, oh, okay. Now, one thing I've learned in consulting is you cannot deal with people. You cannot get them to learn when they're in fear. It's just the reptilian brain. It's just a law of nature. The reptilian brain takes over and your cerebral cortex shuts down. And so trying to teach anybody when they're in fear is like hopeless. Just don't do that. So what I've learned to do is when there's fear present is you got to talk about it. You can't pretend it's not there because it is. No amount of pretense will do it. So I said, okay, well, what are you afraid of? And they explained what he just said. So I said, okay, so I couldn't figure out how to talk them down. So I did something else. I said, look, would you give me an hour to talk about how to do this? Where at the end of an hour, if you don't see how to do this faster, and their manager was in the back of the room, if you don't see how to do it faster, then I will tell him I have failed in my job and you guys can go ahead and do it however you want to. But if you do see how to do it faster, then you'll do it faster because you see it faster. And I could see him like, he trusted me. So he was nodding and smiling. An hour later, I showed them what they were trying to do was convert their software from US to Canada, as I recollect. And it wasn't that simple where localization would work or localization techniques weren't present yet. An hour later, they saw that actually what I was saying they do would speed them up. It took out about 3/4 of the work because they weren't, I can remember this, the template pattern was something that was perfect for them. And they could literally copy only part of what they had and make some minor adjustments to things. And in a couple of days, they could do what they thought was going to be aggressive in a couple of weeks. So that's how you have to look at fear. Okay. World's getting faster definitely hinders the reflective mindset. Yes. This is a good one, Andrew. Andrew Lloyd asks us. This is a good one. And I think it's, that's so well stated because you're absolutely right. We have to get the idea that we have to reflect a little bit. And I'll tell you, there are studies shown anyway, reflection actually, it's almost like you've got so much energy going forward anyway. Reflection can be a very calming thing. I'm not sure I'm going to give you a great answer here. I'll be candid. People do have this. I think maybe, again, I'll go back to that case where you track what's going on. You say, look, we got all this waste. Maybe it's worth spending a little bit. And there's something I actually learned from somebody back in the 80s. He'd call it a conversation for possibilities. He normally have conversations to improve something. And in the conversation for possibility, he said, let's say we got an hour here and we're going to talk about what's possible, but we're not committed to actually figuring something out in particular. Is it worth an hour to invest? So that's how I would frame this. Most of the reflections we do aren't very good because most techniques are about getting better at the framework. What we want to do is shift it to getting better at our work. One thing I think has been forgotten is the customer of Scrum is the team and the product owner and the developers. If they don't like reflection, then maybe there's something wrong with the reflection method. So I would take a look at that as well. I don't like Scrum as agile on training wheels. In fact, they know now that one of the worst ways to teach someone how to ride a bike is to put training wheels on. A better way is to take the pedals off and have people coast downhill and learn balance. Scrum teaches you the wrong things, and Scrum has the wrong mindset of let's learn the framework, shu-ha-ri, let's follow. I think the whole mindset's wrong. And the reason Scrum people say it's agile on training wheels is because they have come up with a simple approach, and it's a simple start. And they don't see how to tailor it because there are no first principles in Scrum. There's Scrum theory and their values, but there are no principles. Once you understand the principles, the way I solve the problem, because this is an issue, you have to have a simple start. You have to have an easy way to get going. But that's where I have this thing I call Amplio Light, which is basically take the core practices you need, like some way to plan, some way to do retros, some way to, write stuff and all that, but presents it as examples of things. Like in our pattern language, it's a collection of competencies you need. So, okay, here's the starting set, but it's not restricted to this set as like Scrum says, this is what you do. Rather, it's a starting set. So yes, what you need is a starter set. And then with the lean flow theory constraint model, you can then add things as you need. Okay. At the beginning, you talked about business agility, and I've seen a lot of consulting companies talk about this, but using different values. Okay. So I've been talking about business agility like before it was the thing. One of my favorite resources is Evan Leaborn's Business Agility Institute. Very consistent with those guys. They're really, really smart. Evan he's just a brilliant guy, very committed to the industry. So for me, it's the ability for business to be agile in business, have agility, it can change, it can pivot. So business agility is how does a business able to shift and change to meet the needs of the client? And that is a business-centric point of view. And let me give you a story about this. I was doing, again, a patterns workshop. This was years ago before I got into the whole business agility thing, actually, but I'd been thinking about it and knew it from our other consultants. And I'm going and I'm doing like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 days at a small, they, I don't know, had 100 developers, something like that. And they did a lot of networking stuff. I remember that. And because I was there, because I knew a lot of process and lean and stuff, because I was doing lean early, they said, hey, would you talk to our execs for an hour or two? I said, yeah, I love that. So I'm in this room with about, I don't know, top 6 people, the CEO, CTO, CFO, marketing guy, and I don't know, somebody else. And the marketing guy started talking to me, and he said, don't get this agile thing. We need all our stuff. So now you got to I don't know this company. I know I don't know this company. So I'm just going to talk to him. I'm going to ask him. I don't know if he's right or wrong. This, by the way, is a good coaching attitude. I talk a lot about this in our professional coaching book. But anyway, so I asked him, I said, oh, okay, so you need all these features. And he said, yeah. And he's not, I don't know if he's technical or not. Sometimes people don't realize that the more stuff you put in a system, the more complicated it is. So I said, you do know that if you put more things in, it gets more complicated. Yeah, I understand that. I understand why we'd like to have less, but we need all this stuff. I said, okay. So I'm questioning the need, but I don't tell them that. I'm just asking questions. So I say, so does everybody use all these features? And he says, no. But if we do feature comparisons, and if we don't have all the features listed, they won't buy the product. Okay, I get it. Do the customers realize that they don't need all the features? Or do they figure that out? And he says, well, yeah, they figure that out. But again, at the start, they are looking as a feature comparison. Okay, I got it. So let me ask you this. See, so what he's doing is he's trading off harder to change, not being agile, to not having business agility, for having all these features. So I ask him, I don't know if he's right or not. I want you to get this. I don't know if he's right or not. He's the guy in charge. But we don't think and talk about what we see. We see what we're able to think and talk about. And it has occurred to me that there's another way to market in this company. And he's the guy who has to decide this. So I ask him this. Now he can see the option. I say, well, what would you rather be known for? Would you rather be known for the company that gives you all the features that you're not going to use? Or would you rather be known for the company that gives you the features you need, and the next time something comes up, we can supply it to you faster? And you could just see, he just stopped and he started looking at that. He had never considered this before. And he says, oh, I'd rather be somebody who could respond faster because the world is changing. This goes back to that other comment. So this is how you have to start dealing with things. You have to have faith in this and be able to be challenged and learn more. Okay, good to Stuart. So I hope he's still here. The thinking of the switch of focus from the team to the organization. What level do you think is important to be consistent in across teams? Understanding theory with team level flexibility in practices, process, or consistent practices across teams. Okay, like they go too far. You need to be consistent in the intention and the objectives. Actually, an easier way to think about it is this, and this is why I use patterns. I'm very much based on Chris Alexander's approach of design. You think of the whole, you break it down, but you keep the relationships. You need to create an overall context within which everyone works. Everyone has to work within that context. But how they implement working within that context is their choice. So they still self-organize. But the rules of the game have to be consistent across. In fact, this is why I'm trying to work with internal training organizations, because they often have this, oh, no, everybody's got to do it the same way. Everybody's got to do it the same way. But that's because their choice between Scrum and Safe tells them everybody has to do it that same way. If you think of it as a set of things that have to be accomplished, or each of those things that have to be accomplished, you're given a pattern solution to a recurring problem in a context, but which can be implemented any way that's appropriate for the context. Remember, solutions in a context. Then you can say everybody has to meet this consistency behavior, but how you do it is yours. And this is a very important piece. And this is why I don't like frameworks, because frameworks can't give you this, because the framework, when it's implementing the pattern, I mean, the way of doing it is locking you into an implementation. Okay, great. I'm getting toward the end, but I still got 13 minutes. So the number of new messages are going down. Okay. Okay. Right. Great question. And actually one of my sore points. Okay. Scrum takes the approach and falls into the technical practice option. No, they're not optional if you're doing Scrum. See, so here's a challenge that Scrum's approach has. They're trying to be more and more and more abstract. And in the process, that lets them apply everywhere, but then you don't know what you use in different situations. This is where, when you come up with a set of practices, since there are no universal practices and you don't have theory, what the problem you're discussing is exactly the problem with practices only. And I know they have their own values and principles, but I'm talking first principles. So what I'm suggesting is you can work on non-software products, but you still need to get feedback. You still need to eliminate waste. You still need quick testing. You still need all these things. In software, you use one set of practices, and it's not optional that you use some practice. You get to choose which practice. So if you're doing software, it's not probably, you almost certainly want technical. So you cannot just go more and more abstract to get more and more people working on it. It gets to be an overgeneralization and becomes less useful. So in Scrum, you're losing practices you should follow, so it applies more generically. What I'm suggesting is you look at the intentions, the objectives, and those are sacrosanct. You have to do those. Now, the order in which you apply them is up in the air for how do you manifest this stuff, but that you have to, and you take the most important ones. Now your choice is how do you do it, not if you do it. That's the key piece. How do you do it, not if you do it. By the way, if you've asked a question, I've answered it, and it wasn't good enough for you, just ask a different, more pointed question. I'm happy to do that. Okay. Thoughts that take into account the increased focus on customer experience. Okay. Actually, I think I'm going to be creating a course. I have this program I call the Amplo Consultant Educators. It's kind of like for senior consultants. I've got 15 people in it. It's really kind of picking my brain of the advanced things I'm doing. And one of the things, there are two things I do in this area that are quite, well, one's unique. I created it and I've written it up a little bit, but nobody's using it besides, except on the technical side. And the other one is rarely used, but has to do with the customer journey. Okay. What you need to do is look at how customers get their job done. Okay. And you just really have to pay attention to this. And I'll give you an example. You have to come from, what are the commitments? What are the rather objectives that customers have? And the best story I have for this is, I forget his name. He was a CEO of Sony Morita, I think. And I knew somebody who knew him, and that's how I got this story. But anyway, he had to travel as CEO of Sony, and he liked classical music. And this was back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, before the Sony Walkman. And he couldn't do both. And he was empathetic with that. And he says he was up in his hotel overlooking Central Park in New York City. And he noticed that some people were running without any music. They didn't have Sony Walkmans back then. And he saw, oh, that person, they got a commitment to health. And then he saw people who were walking with boom boxes, like these, 3 feet, 3 feet long, foot by foot, heavy things on your shoulder, music blaring, and they have commitment to music. And remember, it's New York at Central Park. So if it was somebody running with a boombox in New York, it's another story. But most people were either running without music or walking with music. And he could relate that, man, these guys, see, they weren't asking him for a Walkman, but he saw that they wanted something that could do that by looking at how they were working and understanding what their commitments to themselves were. And he got the idea of a Sony Walkman out of this. Oh, what if we had a small player, not recorder? Now, what's interesting about this, and this is why there's this buzz on customer experience in UX. See, to me, this buzz on customer experience in UX, and I'm talking as a past dev who was so overly centric to the systems, I'm telling one on myself, but I got out of this. Most devs are only thinking in terms of the system. Look at how they build it. Look at how they explain it. They don't talk to people how the people work. They talk about the system. And we've got to cut that out. And so when he got this idea of the Sony Walkman, his developers, engineers, they kept making small tape recorders until finally said, you send me another small tape recorder here, I'm firing you. I want a player without a recorder, because he knew that would make it smaller and lighter. So we have to get away this systems thinking. I'll tell one more story about this. This comes from Joy Inc. By Richard Sheridan, a brilliant book. It's 2 books in one. It's how to build a great organization. And it is the best book on extreme programming I've ever read. But he raises this question. Imagine you've got your TV, it's on, it's totally functioning. You've got a DVD built into it, and you've got your controller, and you press play and nothing happens. And also imagine there's nothing wrong with the DVD, the TV, or the controller. Nothing wrong. Batteries, everything. Why is that happening? Why is it not playing? And there's a DVD in the player. Why is that happening? Because the player is in the mode of TV and not DVD. Now, from a user's point of view, this makes no sense. I'm pressing the play button, play. But from a systems point of view, it makes total sense. So you got to get out of this thinking of the system and thinking of the customer experience. That's my best thing on that. Okay, Scott's. I see a lot of churn in teams, people leaving, organizations bringing in short-term contractors. This makes it difficult to learn and maintain knowledge. Any suggestions? I've seen companies almost go out of business doing this. Literally, I've seen companies go out of business doing this. This is some of where the big accounting firms have just destroyed things. I mean, I've really gone in after some companies that, oh yeah, well, I forget who it was, but you know, what you have to do is start showing. There are 2 things I think to do. 3 things, actually. One is you have to show the loss of this. You need to pay attention to business architecture, because that's typically the killer. Business architecture is what tends to get lost the most. People don't know the rules and how they interact. So at a minimum, keep your business architecture on. Don't have it just be the developers know what's going on. You've got to have business architecture. The second thing is, again, document this, not by separate documentation, but by working documentation. Again, use mirror boards, collaboration boards, where you come up with how decisions are made and you track it. And the most important thing is show the value of becoming a learning organization. See, let me say something here about executives and managers. I know these complaints, and you know what? There's a lot of truth to them. I'm not trying to discount them. But a lot of why people don't do things is reflected, I think, in Ellie Goldrat's comment. Command and control is more about a lack of knowledge than it is about, it's a comfort zone thing. If you're not comfortable going into something new, command and control shows up. So you've got to get people to understand why becoming a learning organization is useful, and you got to lower the pain of that. This is, again, the flipped classroom, incremental learning that I'm pioneering is so important. Okay. Yeah, common language and understanding is key for success. We don't talk about what we see what we think and talk about. If we're thinking and talking about in different ways, there's confusion. Pattern language, definitely. Okay, almost down to the end. Let's see. Okay, safes and scrums. Scrum has kind of just retrenched on the whole commitment thing. It has to do with recognizing in our culture, and I'm talking our culture, I shouldn't say that, a lot of people are around the world. In the US culture, probably European culture too, if you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, you're bad and wrong. And maybe not consciously and not really, but that's part of the culture. Okay. That's part of the culture. The thing is, there's no way you can always promise and keep your promise. Well, some promises, yes. So when I go into a training and I talk about commitments and promises, in fact, this is in my book about, promising. What does a promise mean? See, to me, a promise is this. I'm promising to get this thing done for you and use the best I can. And I'm also promising that if it starts showing up that I can't do it, after my best efforts, something beyond my control is the only excuse I have. Something beyond my control is all I can do. In other words, it can't be, well, I didn't do it because I didn't have time. No, that was beyond my control. That was in my control. How I do my time is in my control. But if something happens that's beyond my control, then I promise to let you know as soon as possible and work out with you how to go forward. This is a issue of responsibility. We don't have people taking responsibility. So yes, we should have promises. I don't really like this stuff. Oh, well, we're not committing. Well, what good is that? You have to put your foot down, say, I'm doing everything I can. And when I can't, I will let you know and we'll see what's going on. Now, some people say, well, that just gives people an out. It says, no, it doesn't give people an out. They have to be doing the best they can. They promise that. They can't just say, oh, I didn't make it. It's not just letting it go like that. Kent Beck was who I was talking about. Kent Beck wrote XP Explained, a brilliant book. Read the second edition, though. XP Explained, yeah. Joy Inc. by Richard Sheridan. Oh, that's the one you meant. Yeah, Joy Inc. That's the better XP book. Kent Beck is one of the co-creators of XP. But I was referring to Richard Sheridan's book. He does a lot of stuff which runs counter to common knowledge in Agile. And it's brilliant. I know Richard. I mean, I've never done anything with him. And that's D-A-N, not D-I-N. But it's really brilliant book. Well, Agile and waterfall can coexist, but there's no point in it. I've written articles that say why Agile may or may not apply as it's defined now because of incremental delivery, but I don't believe waterfall ever makes sense unless you're just doing something over and over again, and even then it doesn't make sense. Look at Lean. Lean came from a manufacturing company. You can always improve. So Lean and flow and theory of constraints, you should always be using those ideas. And I'm trying to turn Agile into being consistent with those ideas. Okay. How about